In a seaside mansion in New York, a 9-year-old girl holds a secret that will destroy a dynasty. During the family patriarch's birthday dinner, she whispers words that no one expected to hear. "He is not your son." The silence that follows is deafening, but what really changes everything is what she does next. Sophia had always been an observant child. With dark, perceptive eyes inherited from her Brazilian mother, she caught details that adults often ignored. At 9 years old, she already knew the difference between what people said and what they really meant. She learned this skill by living in the shadows of wealth, observing without being noticed. Her mother, Julia Santos, had worked for 8 years as a housekeeper in the Harrison Mansion in Long Island, a house of glass and marble that seemed to float above the Atlantic Ocean, with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the sea like a living painting. For Sophia, that house was a museum where she couldn't touch anything, but where she could observe everything. Richard Harrison, the property owner and possessor of a fortune estimated at hundreds of millions of dollars, rarely noticed the girl's presence. At his recently turned 60 years of age, the real estate magnate had bigger concerns: expanding his empire, keeping his young wife satisfied, and preparing his only son Gregory to take over the family business. "Mom, why doesn't Mr. Harrison ever smile at Gregory the same way Olivia's father smiles at her?" Sophia asked one afternoon, comparing her mother's employer with her only school friend's father. Julia was meticulously folding Egyptian silk sheets, her calloused fingers contrasting with the soft fabric. "Each family is different, dear. Mr. Harrison is a busy man." But Sophia knew it was more than that. She had seen how Richard looked at Gregory with a strange expression, almost as if searching for something familiar in the young man's face and never finding it. Gregory Harrison, 32, had perfectly cut blonde hair and the practiced smile of someone who attended the best private schools. He spent more time on his cell phone than talking with his father. Sophia observed him from the kitchen door when he visited the mansion, usually to ask for more money or to discuss the company. The only person who really noticed Sophia was Victoria, Richard's second wife. 27 years younger than her husband, Victoria treated the girl like a small confidant. "You have intelligent eyes," Victoria said once, while Sophia watched her try on jewelry in front of the mirror. "I bet you keep many secrets, don't you?" Sophia just smiled without answering. Because yes, she did. Like the secret she discovered on the day she was playing hide-and-seek in areas of the house where her mother had instructed her not to enter. In Victoria's office, hidden behind a leather armchair, she heard a phone conversation she shouldn't have heard. "Elena, you need to calm down," Victoria was speaking in a low voice. "Richard will never find out. The DNA test is locked in my safe. Gregory will continue to be the heir to everything, as we agreed." Elena. Sophia knew that name. She was Richard's first wife, Gregory's mother, who now lived somewhere in Europe. "Trust me," Victoria continued, "Richard will never know that Gregory is not his son. We all benefit from this arrangement." That night, lying in her small bed in the back room she shared with her mother, Sophia tried to understand what she had discovered. Her young heart was heavy with the knowledge she carried. Julia noticed her daughter's restlessness. "What's wrong, my love? Had a nightmare?" Sophia shook her head, unable to share. Her mother already had enough worries. 3 months ago, Julia had received a diagnosis of a heart condition that would require expensive surgery that her limited insurance wouldn't cover. Every penny she saved went to the medical fund. She couldn't lose this job. The situation changed the following week when Sophia found Julia crying in the small staff room. "What happened, Mom?" "Nothing, dear." Julia tried to hide it, wiping away her tears. "I'm just tired." But later, Sophia heard her mother talking quietly on the phone with her aunt in Brazil. Richard was considering selling the mansion. Victoria wanted to move to California. If this happened, Julia would lose not only her job, but also their accommodation. "I don't know what we'll do," whispered Julia. "I don't have enough money for the treatment, much less for rent in New York." That's when Sophia decided. Richard's 60th birthday would be that weekend. A grand party was being planned, with important guests, including Gregory and Eleanor, who would come especially from Europe for the event. On the night of the party, the mansion shone like an illuminated ship anchored at the edge of the dark ocean. Luxury cars lined up at the circular entrance. Men in suits and women in expensive dresses filled the halls. Julia and the other staff worked discreetly, serving canapes and champagne. Sophia wore her only good dress, a navy blue piece that her mother had bought on sale for special occasions when she needed to accompany her to work at events. Victoria had allowed the girl to circulate at the party, finding her presence adorable. A child to entertain the guests with her innocence. Little did she know that this innocence carried an explosive truth. During dinner, when everyone was seated at the long oak table, Richard stood up for a toast. Gregory was on his right, Eleanor on his left, and Victoria next to her stepson. Julia was discreetly serving wine in crystal glasses. "I thank everyone for being present on this special night," Richard began, "especially my son Gregory, who will one day take over everything I've built." It was at that moment that Sophia, who was watching from the dining room entrance, walked silently until she stood next to Richard. "He is not your son," she said, her voice clear enough for everyone at the head of the table to hear. The silence that followed was absolute. Julia dropped the wine bottle, which shattered on the marble floor. "Sophia!" exclaimed Julia, horrified. But the girl wasn't finished. From her dress pocket, she took out a blue flash drive. "And I can prove it." The chaos that followed was immediate. Victoria rose abruptly, knocking over her champagne flute, while Richard looked at the girl with a mixture of confusion and anger. Gregory remained paralyzed, his face visibly paling beneath his artificial tan. "Julia, take your daughter out of here right now," Victoria ordered, her voice trembling slightly. Julia rushed to Sophia, grabbing her by the arm. "Forgive me, Mr. Harrison," mumbled Julia, the panic evident in her eyes. "I don't know what got into her." "But Mom, I have proof," protested Sophia, firmly holding the flash drive. "They're lying to Mr. Harrison." A murmur ran through the table. The 30 guests, all members of New York's elite, alternated glances between the host and the small intruder. Eleanor, Richard's first wife, seated on the other side of the table, looked as if she had seen a ghost. "All of you, please excuse us," Richard said to the guests, his voice controlled but tense. "Victoria, please take our friends to the terrace. Gregory, Eleanor, stay." As the guests withdrew amid speculative whispers, Richard turned to Julia. "You stay too." And the girl. Victoria hesitated at the door, panic growing in her eyes, but she complied with her husband's request. When the room emptied, leaving only the 5 of them, Richard sat heavily in his chair. "Now," he said, looking directly at Sophia, "explain what you meant." Julia squeezed her daughter's hand, silently begging her to retract, but Sophia met Richard's eyes, tired eyes of a man who had spent decades building an empire, only to feel that something was always missing. "I found a DNA test in Mrs. Victoria's office," Sophia began, her voice small but firm. "She hid it in the safe behind the flower painting. I took a picture with my mom's phone and discovered what it means." Gregory let out a forced laugh. "You're going to believe a child's fantasies?" "The flash drive has the photos I took of the documents," continued Sophia, ignoring the interruption. "And I also recorded Mrs. Victoria talking with Mrs. Eleanor on the phone about how they would never tell you the truth." Eleanor emitted a muffled sound, something between a sob and an exclamation. Richard kept his gaze fixed on Sophia, slowly extending his hand. "Give me that." Sophia placed the small blue flash drive in the millionaire's palm, feeling the weight of the choice she had made. Julia trembled beside her, silent tears streaming down her face. "Mr. Harrison," Julia began, "I don't know what my daughter thinks she heard, but surely there's a misunderstanding. I apologize 1,000 times for interrupting your party. We'll leave now and—" "I believe this needs to be verified first," Richard interrupted her, his voice low and controlled. "Gregory, what do you have to say about this?" The young man adjusted his expensive tie, visibly uncomfortable. "Obviously, it's some kind of scheme. Probably the maid instructed her daughter to create this drama, hoping for some kind of payment to keep quiet about this absurd lie." The accusation hit Julia like a slap. "I would never. My daughter would never. Why don't we open the flash drive and get this over with?" Eleanor suddenly suggested, her refined European voice cutting through the tension. There was something in her tone, a resignation perhaps, that made Richard look at her with renewed suspicion. "My office, now," ordered Richard. 5 minutes later, they were all gathered in Richard's imposing office. Dark wood panels covered the walls, and a panoramic view of the Atlantic Ocean served as a backdrop for the tense scene unfolding. Richard inserted the flash drive into his state-of-the-art laptop. The photos appeared on the screen. Documents from a highly reputable laboratory dated 20 years ago. Exams that showed without a doubt that Richard Harrison could not be Gregory's biological father. There was also an audio file. Richard clicked on it, and Victoria's voice filled the room. "Elena, you need to calm down. Richard will never find out. The DNA test is locked in my safe. Gregory will continue to be the heir to everything, as we agreed." The recording continued, revealing a long-standing agreement between the two women to keep Richard in the dark about Gregory's true paternity. Richard turned off the audio, a deadly silence falling over the office. His face, normally controlled, now showed a storm of emotions: betrayal, anger, pain accumulated over decades. 32 years, he finally said, looking at Elena. 32 years believing he was my son. Elena didn't respond immediately. Her eyes, once dazzling and now marked by fine wrinkles, stared at the floor. "Who is the father?" Richard demanded. "Does it matter now?" Elena retorted, finally looking up. "Gregory is your son in every way except blood. You raised him. He has your name, your values." "Lies!" Richard slammed his fist on the mahogany desk, making everyone jump. "My entire life based on lies." Gregory remained strangely quiet throughout the confrontation, as if he were processing the information as much as Richard. Perhaps, Sophia thought watching him, he didn't know either. "Father," Gregory began, and then corrected. "Richard, I didn't know." "Don't call me father," Richard replied, his voice now dangerously calm. "Apparently, I never was." Victoria, who until then had been watching the scene with growing horror, finally spoke. "Richard, darling, you need to understand that I did this to protect you. When I discovered this secret shortly after our marriage, I thought it would be better." "Better for whom?" Richard interrupted. "For you? To have access to my fortune while conspiring with my ex-wife? For all of us," Victoria insisted. "For the company, for the family. A scandal would destroy everything." Richard slowly turned to Julia and Sophia, as if only now remembering their presence. "You two, leave. This is a family matter." Julia took her daughter's hand, ready to leave quickly, but Sophia resisted. "Mr. Harrison," the girl said, gathering all her courage, "my mother had nothing to do with this. She didn't even know. I did this alone because—" She hesitated, looking at Julia. "Because we need help. My mother is sick and needs expensive surgery." Julia turned pale. "Sophia, please, don't." Richard studied the housekeeper with a renewed look. "Sick? What kind of illness?" "Heart problem," Sophia answered before her mother could stop her. "The insurance doesn't cover it, and we don't have enough money. And when I heard that, you might sell this house and send us away. So this was blackmail?" Gregory interrupted, pointing an accusing finger. "See, Richard? They planned all this." "No," protested Julia, finally finding her voice. "I didn't know anything about this. Sophia, how could you?" She turned to Richard, desperation stamped on her face. "Mr. Harrison, I swear I didn't participate in this. I'll pack our things and we'll leave immediately." "Nobody is going anywhere," decided Richard, surprising everyone. "Not until we resolve this situation." He stood up, walking to the window to contemplate the dark ocean. "Julia, take your daughter to your room and stay there until further notice. Victoria, call our lawyer. He should be among the guests. Gregory, Elena, you don't leave this room." As Julia and Sophia left, the girl looked back one last time. Richard remained with his back to the room, his shoulders curved as if the weight of 60 years had suddenly doubled. In the small room they shared in the back of the mansion, Julia finally collapsed, not in anger, as Sophia expected, but in silent, desperate crying. "It's over, Sophia," she said between sobs. "Everything is over. Not only have I lost my job, but I'll never get a reference again. How will we survive? How will I pay for the treatment?" Sophia sat beside her mother, tears also running down her childish face. "I'm sorry, Mum. I just wanted to help. Mrs. Victoria was going to convince Mr. Harrison to sell the house, and we would be homeless. And you needed the surgery." Julia hugged her daughter, her body still trembling. "I know your intentions were good, dear, but we can't interfere in others' lives like that, no matter how unfair it may seem. Some truths cause more harm than good." "But they were lying to him," Sophia argued. "That's not right. Life is rarely as simple as right and wrong," Julia replied, stroking her daughter's hair. "Now we need to face the consequences. Tomorrow I'll start looking for another job, in another city perhaps." A soft knock on the door interrupted the conversation. Julia quickly wiped away her tears before opening. It was Collins, the head butler, his habitually impassive face showing rare concern. "Mr. Harrison requests your presence in the library, Miss Santos," he announced formally. "Just you for now." Julia swallowed hard, automatically smoothing the wrinkles in her uniform. "I'll be there in a minute." When Collins left, she turned to Sophia, holding her daughter's face between her hands. "Stay here and don't leave. Understood? Whatever Mr. Harrison's decision, we will accept it with dignity." Sophia nodded, her stomach tight with guilt and fear. As she watched her mother leave, the small suitcase they always kept packed for emergencies in the corner of the room seemed an ominous presence, a reminder of how precarious their situation was. In the library, Richard was alone, sitting in a leather armchair, an untouched glass of whiskey in front of him. The party outside continued. Victoria had evidently managed to keep up appearances, but the music and laughter seemed to come from another world. "Sit down, Julia," he indicated a nearby chair. She obeyed, keeping her posture erect and her hands firmly crossed in her lap to hide her trembling. "How long have you worked for me?" Richard asked, his voice tired. 8 years, sir. 8 years?" he repeated, as if processing the information. "And in all that time, you've always been discreet," Julia completed. "It's part of my job, sir." Richard nodded slowly. "Yes, discreet. A quality that apparently other people in my life lack." He took a sip of whiskey before continuing. "Your daughter mentioned health problems?" Julia hesitated. She had her pride, but she also had responsibilities. "Yes, sir. A heart condition that requires surgery." "And why didn't you inform me?" "It wasn't relevant to my work, sir. I've always performed my duties adequately." "Even while sick?" "Especially while sick," Julia replied, allowing herself a moment of honesty. "This job, this house, it's all we have." Richard studied her for a long moment. "What your daughter did tonight was unforgivable. A violation of privacy, an intrusion into matters that don't concern her." "I know, sir, and I apologize 1,000 times. We'll pack our things immediately." "However," Richard continued as if she hadn't spoken, "I cannot ignore that in 9 years of life, your daughter has demonstrated more honesty than people I've known for decades." Julia looked up surprised. "Don't misunderstand me," Richard clarified. "What she did was wrong. But the motive—" He paused, contemplating the amber liquid in his glass. "The motive was to protect you, just as I believed all these years that my wives were protecting me." He let out a bitter laugh. "The irony doesn't escape you, does it?" "Sir?" A 9-year-old child understood what was at stake and acted, even knowing she would face consequences. While Gregory— He didn't finish the sentence, just shook his head. Richard stood up, walking to an antique desk in the corner of the library. From a drawer, he took out a checkbook. "This is the deal I propose, Julia. You keep your job. I cover the costs of your surgery and recovery. In exchange, you and your daughter maintain absolute silence about the events of tonight." Julia blinked, uncertain if she had understood correctly. "Sir, what happened here is a family matter that we will resolve privately. I don't need rumors circulating among the servants, or worse, in the press. Consider the medical payment as a bonus for services rendered." The relief Julia felt was immediately followed by discomfort. It was essentially a bribe to buy her silence. On the other hand, it represented the surgery that would save her life, security for her daughter. "And what about Sophia?" she asked. "Your daughter is intelligent, but she needs to learn boundaries," Richard replied. "She will return to school on Monday as if nothing had happened, but on weekends, she will spend 4 hours a day studying ethics and privacy with a tutor I will hire." It wasn't a severe punishment, considering the gravity of the situation. Julia nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison." "Don't thank me yet," he said, scribbling something on the check. "I have a feeling that the coming days will be turbulent for all of us." When Julia returned to the room, Sophia was sitting on the bed, her eyes red from crying. "Are we leaving, Mum?" she asked in a low voice. Julia sat beside her daughter, still processing the surreal conversation she had just had. "No, dear, we are not leaving. But what you did was very serious, and there will be consequences." As she explained the deal that Richard had proposed, Julia noticed a subtle change in her daughter's countenance. Not relief, as she expected, but something more complex. A precocious understanding that her actions had irrevocably altered the balance of that house, that family. Outside, the birthday party continued, the guests unaware of the drama unfolding behind the scenes. The next morning, life in the Harrison mansion would never be the same. 3 weeks had passed since the night of the revelation. The Harrison mansion, previously an environment of discreet luxury and predictable routines, now seemed charged with static electricity, an invisible tension that made everyone walk cautiously, speak in lower tones, avoid direct glances. Julia had undergone pre-operative exams at a private clinic in Manhattan. Her surgery was scheduled for the following month. Richard's financial generosity came with a personal distancing. He barely spoke to her or any other employee, except to give necessary instructions. Victoria had gone to the family's beach house in Florida, officially to supervise renovations, but everyone knew it was a temporary exile while the dust settled. Gregory no longer appeared at the mansion. According to rumors among the staff, he and Richard had had a brutal discussion in the office the day after the party, with words that neither of them could ever take back. It was Saturday morning, and Sophia was in her third session with Dr. Whitman, a retired ethics professor from Columbia University, hired by Richard for her special classes. "Actions have consequences that go beyond our intentions," explained the professor, an elderly gentleman with white hair and round glasses who reminded Sophia of a children's book character. "You understand that, don't you?" Sophia nodded, looking out the window of the small study room where they had their lessons. Outside, the garden displayed the first flowers of spring yellow daffodils swaying gently in the sea breeze. "I understand," she replied. "I wanted to help my mother, but I hurt other people." "Exactly," Dr. Whitman smiled gently. "Ethics is not just about differentiating right from wrong, but about navigating the complexities of our choices when important values come into conflict." The girl frowned, processing the concept. "Like when the truth hurts someone?" "Precisely. There are moments when different moral values, such as honesty, loyalty, care for others, seem to pull us in opposite directions. So, should I have let Mr. Harrison continue to be deceived?" It was the question Sophia had been asking herself repeatedly in the last few weeks, as she observed the silent pain of the man who occasionally crossed paths with her in the corridors of the mansion, a man who seemed to have aged a decade in just days. Dr. Whitman adjusted his glasses. "I'm not here to answer that question for you, Sophia. I'm here to help you develop the tools to find your own answers. But one thing I can say, there's rarely a perfect choice in genuine ethical dilemmas." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Julia entered, looking tired but less tense than in previous weeks. "Excuse the interruption, Dr. Whitman. Sophia, Mr. Harrison would like to see you in his office when your lesson is over." The news surprised them both. It was the first time Richard had requested the girl's presence since the incident. "Of course, Mum," Sophia replied, feeling a knot in her stomach. "We're almost finished." When Julia left, Dr. Whitman smiled encouragingly. "It seems we'll have a practical case study today. Remember, courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it." 15 minutes later, Sophia was standing in front of the imposing oak door of Richard Harrison's private office. She took a deep breath and knocked softly. "Come in." The office was a masculine sanctuary of dark wood, leather and old books. Large windows offered a panoramic view of the Atlantic Ocean, today agitated under a cloudy sky. Richard was seated behind his desk, but not alone. On the other side, seated in a leather armchair, was Gregory. The unexpected presence of Richard's son made Sophia hesitate at the door. "Come, Sophia." Richard gestured for her to approach. "Gregory has something to discuss with you." Gregory Harrison looked different from the confident and arrogant man Sophia knew. His face was pale, his eyes marked by deep circles, his normally impeccable hair slightly disheveled. "Hello, Sophia," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "Hello, Mr. Gregory," she replied formally, keeping a safe distance. An uncomfortable silence fell over the office. Richard observed the interaction with an unreadable expression. "Gregory recently discovered the identity of his biological father," Richard finally explained, his voice controlled. "A former associate of mine named James Thorne." Sophia nodded, not knowing what to say. The name meant nothing to her. "James died 15 years ago," Gregory continued, nervously fidgeting with his luxury watch. "A car accident. I never knew he was my father." "I'm sorry," Sophia offered. Genuinely, Gregory let out a short laugh, without humor. "The point is that I spent 32 years believing Richard was my father. I built my entire identity around that. And then you..." He paused, visibly controlling his emotion. "You revealed something that changed everything for me. In one night. Sophia lowered her eyes, guilt tightening her chest. I didn't want to hurt you, but you did, Gregory replied without accusation, just stating a fact. And at the same time, you did something that no one else had the courage to do. You told the truth. Richard leaned forward, his experienced eyes fixed on Sophia's face. Gregory and I have been talking a lot in recent weeks about truths, lies, and what really constitutes a family. And I've come to a conclusion, Gregory continued. I prefer to live with a painful truth than with a comfortable lie, even if that truth has destroyed the image I had of my own life. That's why we're here today, Richard added. Gregory wants to ask you a question. Gregory stood up, walking to the window before turning to Sophia. For a moment, she saw in him the lost boy beneath the facade of the businessman, someone whose world had been turned upside down as much as Richard's. How did you know? Gregory asked. How did a 9-year-old child notice something that no one else saw in 3 decades? The question caught Sophia by surprise. She expected accusations, perhaps even threats, not genuine curiosity. I observe people, she answered simply. You don't look alike, not just physically, but in manner. And Mr. Harrison always looked at you as if he was searching for something he couldn't find. Gregory exchanged a look with Richard, a look loaded with decades of interactions that now made a new and painful sense. And it wasn't just that, Sophia continued, finding courage in the attentive expressions of the two men. It was what I heard Mrs. Victoria say on the phone. And the documents I found? You put yourself at great risk to help your mother, Richard observed. Why? Because she's my mother, Sophia answered, as if it were obvious. She would do anything for me. I would do anything for her. Something in the simplicity of the answer seemed to hit both men, a fundamental truth that had been lost in the complicated webs of lies, money, and ambition that defined their relationships. That is family, Gregory said softly, more to himself than to the others in the room. Richard stood up, walking to stand beside Sophia. For a moment, she feared he was angry, but when she looked up, she saw something unexpected in his eyes. Not anger, but a sad understanding. Gregory and I have made some decisions, Richard announced. First, he will continue in the company, but not as my heir, as an executive who will need to prove his worth on his own merit. Gregory nodded, accepting the terms. Second, Richard continued, we are establishing a foundation to help children like you, intelligent, observant, with potential, who don't have the resources to fully develop their abilities. A foundation, Sophia repeated, confused. Yes, and we would like you to be the first beneficiary. Me? A complete scholarship to Rose Hill Academy, Gregory explained. It's one of the best preparatory schools on the East Coast. Sophia was speechless. Rose Hill was the school where the children of politicians and celebrities studied, a world completely distant from her reality. But what about my mother? Julia will continue working here if she wishes, Richard assured, and she will have an apartment in the city close to the school for both of you. Consider it part of the scholarship package. The generosity was dizzying, almost incomprehensible. Sophia looked from Richard to Gregory, trying to understand what wasn't being said. Why? She finally asked. Why would you do this after what I did? It was Gregory who answered, coming closer to be at her eye level. Because you showed us the value of truth. Even when it hurts, even when it destroys what we thought we knew. He paused, searching for the right words. And because I realized that spending 30 years living a lie left me empty. I don't want other children to grow up like that. The conversation was interrupted by another knock on the door. It was Collins, the butler, looking uncomfortable. Excuse the interruption, sir, but Mrs. Victoria is on the phone. She says it's urgent. Richard sighed. Tell her I'll call back in a few minutes. When Collins left, Richard turned his attention back to Sophia. This offer is not conditional on anything, understood? It's not a bribe for your silence or a way to control you. It's a recognition of your potential and perhaps a form of compensation for the chaos we've caused in your life. You didn't cause chaos in my life, Sophia protested. I caused it in yours. Richard almost smiled, the closest Sophia had seen him to a positive expression in weeks. Perhaps we've caused chaos in each other's lives, he conceded. The question is, what do we do from now on? The question hung in the air, loaded with possibilities. For Sophia, it was like standing on the edge of a precipice, looking at a future dizzyingly different from what she had ever imagined. Can I think about it? She asked. And talk to my mother? Of course, Richard nodded. Take all the time you need. When Sophia left the office, her mind was whirling. The scholarship, the apartment gifts that would change her life and her mother's forever. But there was something in the sudden generosity that bothered her, something she couldn't exactly define. In the hallway, she found Julia anxiously waiting. "What happened?" Julia asked, studying her daughter's face. "They offered a scholarship," Sophia replied, still stunned, "to Rose Hill Academy, and an apartment for us to live in." Julia turned pale, holding onto the wall for support. "Rose Hill? But that's a lot of money," Sophia completed. "Why would they do this, Mom? After what I did?" Julia pulled her daughter to a more private corner of the hallway, bending down to be at her eye level. "You really don't understand what you did, do you?" Sophia frowned, confused. "You exposed a lie that protected Gregory, but also protected Victoria," Julia explained, keeping her voice low. "With the truth revealed, Richard can contest his prenuptial agreement with her, and Gregory, without being the biological son, no longer has an automatic claim to the Harrison fortune." Understanding began to dawn on Sophia's face. "So, they're thanking me because now Mr. Harrison can keep his money," Julia sighed. "It's more complicated than that. I believe the offer is genuine, but I also believe that in their world, everything has more than one layer, more than one intention." Before they could continue the conversation, they were interrupted by the sound of breaking glass coming from Richard's office. Then his voice raised as they had never heard before. "It was all about the money, wasn't it? From the beginning." Julia gestured for Sophia to move away, but the girl, by instinct, approached the partially open door. Through the crack, she could see Gregory standing, looking alarmed, while Richard spoke tensely on the phone. 30 years, Victoria. 30 years living a lie so that you and Elena could secure your financial future." There was a pause, as Victoria apparently responded. "Don't insult my intelligence," Richard continued. "I just received a call from the investigator. He found the bank transfers between you and Elena dating from before our marriage. You planned everything." Another pause. "It's over, Victoria. The lawyers will contact you tomorrow. Don't worry, they'll be discreet for all our sakes. But don't expect a penny beyond what the prenuptial agreement stipulates, and consider yourself lucky if I don't sue both of you for fraud." Richard hung up the phone forcefully, knocking it off the desk. When he turned, his face was contorted in a mask of anger and pain, the expression of a man who had finally understood the extent of the betrayal he had suffered. It was then that he noticed the partially open door and Sophia's face peeking through. For a terrible moment, she thought he would yell at her too. Instead, he just closed his eyes for an instant, as if gathering strength, before calmly saying, "You should be with your mother, Sophia." "Sorry, sir," she mumbled, quickly backing away. But before she could completely move away, she heard Richard say, more to himself than to anyone else, "At least one person in this house had the courage to tell the truth." That night, as Julia prepared a simple dinner in the small but elegant room they shared, Sophia sat on the bed, hugging her knees. "I think Mr. Harrison and Mr. Gregory are really angry with Mrs. Victoria," she commented. Julia nodded, stirring the soup on the portable electric stove. "Things are complicated in the main house now. Better to keep our distance." "Do you think we should accept the scholarship?" Sophia asked, going straight to the point that had been occupying her mind. Julia stopped what she was doing, sitting beside her daughter. "What do you think?" Sophia thought for a moment. "I think it would be good to study at a better school, and to have our own apartment where you could recover from surgery without having to go back to work right away." "But," Julia encouraged, noticing her daughter's hesitation, "but I don't want them to think they can buy our silence, or that I did all this to get something from them." Julia smiled softly, running her hand through her daughter's hair. "Sophia, sometimes a gift is just a gift, and sometimes people who have been hurt find comfort in helping others." "What do you mean?" "Gregory and Richard are redefining what family means to them, perhaps helping you. A child who risked herself for her family is part of their process." Sophia considered this. "So, you think we should accept?" "I think we should consider the offer for what it really represents. An opportunity for you. Not as payment, not as a bribe, but as a chance that most children in your situation will never have." Before Sophia could respond, they heard a commotion in the staff corridor. Raised voices, hurried footsteps. Julia opened the door to find Collins and other members of the household staff conversing excitedly. "What happened?" Julia asked. "Mrs. Victoria is returning," Collins informed, his habitually impassive face showing concern. "We received orders to prepare her quarters immediately. She will be here within an hour." "So quickly? I thought she was in Florida." Julia commented, surprised. Evidently, she changed her mind, replied Collins dryly, and considering the call Mr. Harrison received earlier. He didn't finish the sentence, but his expression said it all. As the staff dispersed to carry out the orders, Julia closed the door, turning to Sophia with a worried expression. "It seems the storm is just beginning," she murmured. Sophia nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility for what she had triggered. "All this is my fault." "No," Julia said firmly, kneeling to be at her daughter's eye level. "You may have been the catalyst, but these lies and tensions existed long before you were born. Sooner or later, the truth would have come out. Even so, when the lights went out that night, Sophia remained awake, listening to the sounds of the mansion. There in the main floor, she knew, a confrontation was about to happen, a confrontation that would forever change the balance of power in the Harrison family. And somehow, a small 9-year-old Brazilian girl was at the center of it all. The storm that hit Long Island the following morning seemed an appropriate metaphor for the emotional climate inside the Harrison mansion. Rain lashed the panoramic windows, the wind howled around the glass and steel structure, and the ocean, normally serene, had transformed into a grey and turbulent mass. Sophia watched from her room window, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder as her mother had taught her, trying to calculate the distance of the storm. But the real storm, she knew, was inside the house. Victoria had arrived late the previous night. Sophia and Julia heard the car arriving, doors slamming, raised voices that were soon muffled by the thick walls of the mansion. By morning, the staff moved silently through the corridors, exchanging meaningful glances, whispering about the explosive discussion that had apparently lasted until dawn. "It's none of our business," Julia reminded her daughter as she finished getting ready for work. Since the revelation at the party, she had been transferred to less visible services, away from the main quarters, a change that Julia had accepted with silent dignity. "And your surgery?" Sophia asked, changing the subject. "When is it again?" "Next Thursday," Julia replied, checking her reflection in the small mirror. She looked more tired than usual, the dark circles more pronounced, but her eyes maintained their usual determination. "I'll stay in the hospital for 2 days and then have 2 weeks of recovery." "And who will take care of you?" Julia smiled, adjusting her uniform. "Aunt Carmen will come from Brazil to stay with us for a month. She arrives on Tuesday." The news brought some comfort to Sophia. Aunt Carmen, Julia's older sister, was a warm and reassuring presence in their lives, even if usually from a distance. "Meanwhile," Julia continued, "you will go to school normally and behave impeccably. I don't want any more problems, understood?" "Yes, Mum." Julia kissed her daughter's forehead before leaving for her duties. Sophia remained alone in the room, preparing unhurriedly for her weekly lesson with Dr. Whitman, who would arrive in a few hours. When she went out to the corridor, she immediately noticed that something was different. The staff, normally discreet and efficient, seemed distracted, talking in small groups that quickly dissolved upon noticing her presence. In the kitchen, where Sophia went to get a glass of water, she found Mrs. Oliveira, the Brazilian chef who always set aside an extra piece of dessert for her. "What's happening?" Sophia asked in Portuguese, her native language that she spoke at home with her mother and with the few Brazilian staff members. Mrs. Oliveira looked around before answering, also in Portuguese. "The police are here." "Police?" Sophia repeated, alarmed. "In the main living room. It seems Mrs. Victoria has made accusations against Mr. Harrison, something about forged documents." Sophia's heart raced. Forged documents? Could they be the same ones she'd photographed? Before she could ask more, the kitchen door opened, revealing Collins, the butler. His usually impeccable face showed signs of stress, his tie slightly crooked, an unthinkable lapse for someone so meticulous. "Ah, Sophia," he said, seeming almost relieved to see her. "Mr. Harrison asks if you could go to the library." Immediately, Mrs. Oliveira gave Sophia a concerned look, but the girl just nodded. "Should I call my mother?" she asked. "I've already sent someone to locate her," Collins replied, guiding Sophia through the service corridor that led to the main wing of the house. The library was on the second floor, overlooking the back garden and the ocean beyond. When they reached the door, Collins hesitated. "Mr. Harrison is with his lawyer and representatives of the law. Answer only what is asked with honesty and don't worry. Mr. Harrison will ensure that you are protected." Sophia swallowed hard and nodded. Collins knocked softly on the door before opening it for her. The library was normally a sanctuary of tranquility, with mahogany floor-to-ceiling shelves loaded with first editions and leather bindings. Today, however, the atmosphere was tense. Richard Harrison stood near the unlit fireplace talking quietly with a shorter man in a grey suit. His lawyer, Sophia presumed. Seated in armchairs in the center of the room were two men in formal attire, one of them taking notes in a notebook. On a sofa near the window, to Sophia's surprise, was Gregory, looking tense but determined. The only person absent was Victoria. "Ah, Sophia," Richard greeted her, interrupting his conversation. "Thank you for coming. These gentlemen have some questions for you." One of the men stood up, approaching with a smile that was meant to be reassuring, but that didn't reach his watchful eyes. "Hello, Sophia. My name is Detective Rodriguez. This is my colleague, Detective Markson. We need to talk about the documents you found in Mrs. Victoria Harrison's office. Is that okay?" Sophia looked at Richard, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, sir," she replied. "Excellent. First, could you tell us exactly how you found these documents?" Sophia took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. "I was playing hide and seek," she began, reporting in surprising detail how she had discovered the safe behind the painting, how she had heard the telephone conversation, and how she had eventually photographed the documents with her mother's cell phone. "And why did you do this?" asked Detective Markson, speaking for the first time. "Because," Sophia hesitated, aware of how her motivations might sound. "Because my mother is sick and needs expensive surgery. I heard that Mr. Harrison might sell the house and send us away. I thought that if he knew the truth about Mr. Gregory, maybe he would help you in exchange," suggested Markson, his tone suggesting disapproval. "Not exactly," Sophia protested. "I just wanted him to know the truth. It didn't seem fair that everyone was lying to him." Detective Rodriguez intervened. "Sophia, do you have knowledge that Mrs. Victoria Harrison altered legal documents? Wills, birth certificates, anything like that?" The question caught Sophia by surprise. "No, sir. I only saw the DNA test showing that Mr. Harrison was not Mr. Gregory's father." The detectives exchanged glances. Richard approached, placing a reassuring hand on the girl's shoulder. "Sophia is being completely honest, gentlemen. As I said from the beginning, my wife is making unfounded accusations as a tactic to force a more favorable divorce settlement. Rather specific accusations," observed Markson. "She alleges that you, sir, after discovering about your son's paternity, forged documents to disinherit him and retroactively alter your will." "Which is absurd," the lawyer interjected. "Mr. Harrison wouldn't need to forge anything. He has every legal right to alter his will as he wishes." The library door opened again, and Julia entered hurriedly, her face pale with worry. Seeing her daughter surrounded by strangers, she rushed to her side. "What's happening?" she asked, automatically pulling Sophia close to her. "Just some routine questions, Miss Santos," Detective Rodriguez explained. "Your daughter has been very helpful." Gregory, who until then had remained silent, stood up to join the conversation. "I think I can clarify this situation," he said. "Victoria is trying to divert attention from the fact that she and my mother conspired for years to hide the truth about my paternity. If anyone falsified documents, it was them." The detectives considered this information. Detective Markson consulted his notes before asking, "Mr. Harrison, Gregory, are you saying you have no interest in contesting the changes to your father's? Sorry, Richard's will?" Gregory looked at Richard, a long and complex look that seemed to communicate years of shared history. "I'm saying that I accept the reality of my situation. I am not Richard's biological son, something he believed for 32 years. Any inheritance I receive will be by his choice, not by legal right or obligation." "And what about the agreement you made?" Markson pressed. "The foundation? The scholarship for the girl? Victoria Harrison alleges that this is essentially a bribe to silence witnesses." Sophia felt Julia's grip on her shoulder intensify. "That's absurd," Richard replied, the indignation evident in his voice. "The foundation was a joint decision by Gregory and me to make something positive out of this whole situation, and the scholarship for Sophia is a recognition of her potential, not a bribe." Detective Rodriguez closed his notebook. "Well, unless Victoria Harrison presents concrete evidence of her accusations, I see no reason to take this further. However, Mr. Harrison, I strongly recommend that you keep detailed records of all legal changes you make from now on. High-profile divorces like this tend to get complicated. My lawyers are taking care of everything, Richard assured. And I thank you for coming so promptly. I prefer to resolve any misunderstanding immediately. When the detectives finally left, escorted by Collins, a heavy silence fell over the library. Richard suddenly looked older, the lines on his face more pronounced in the grey light filtering through the windows. I'm sorry for involving you in this, he said to Julia and Sophia. Victoria is looking for any possible angle. Where is she now? Julia asked, her voice calm but tense. At the spa in Manhattan where she likes to de-stress, Richard replied with evident sarcasm. Apparently, making false accusations against one's husband is exhausting. Gregory approached Sophia, kneeling to be at her eye level. Thank you for your honesty, he said. Not just today, but from the beginning. You're a very brave girl. Sophia didn't know how to respond. The last few weeks had been an emotional roller coaster, completely transforming her perception of the adults around her. What happens now? She asked no one in particular. It was Richard who answered. Now we all move forward. Gregory and I are finalizing the details of the foundation. The divorce will follow its legal course. And as for you, he exchanged a look with Julia. Your mother and I have talked, and if you accept, the offer of the scholarship and the apartment stands. Julia nodded slowly. After much reflection, we decided to accept. For Sophia's future. The news caught Sophia by surprise. Her mother hadn't mentioned having made a decision. And what about your job here? Sophia asked. I will continue working for Mr. Harrison, but in a different capacity, explained Julia. I will supervise the domestic staff for this and other properties. It means more responsibility, better pay, and a schedule that will allow me to be more present for you. It was more than Sophia had ever hoped for. A true transformation of their circumstances, born from the chaos she herself had unleashed. Classes at Rosehill begin next semester, Richard added. Meanwhile, I suggest you continue your sessions with Dr. Whitman. He speaks very highly of your progress. Gregory checked his watch. I need to go. I have a meeting with the lawyers in an hour. He hesitated before adding, Richard, are we still having dinner tonight? Richard nodded. At 7. I have some ideas about restructuring the real estate division that I'd like to discuss with you. The moment between the two men, no longer father and son in the biological sense, but something new that they were still defining, had an almost fragile quality, precious in its vulnerability. When Gregory left and Julia was called to resolve an issue with the kitchen staff, Sophia found herself alone with Richard. He walked to the window, observing the storm that was finally beginning to subside. You know, Sophia, he said without looking at her, I spent 60 years building an empire, acquiring properties, expanding fortunes, creating a dynasty, and in a single night, you showed me that all of this was built on a foundation of lies. I'm sorry, she offered, not knowing what else to say. Richard turned, a surprising smile on his tired face. Don't be. For the first time in decades, I'm living in truth. It's painful, yes, devastating in many ways, but also liberating. He approached, studying the girl's face with a new appreciation. You have a rare gift, Sophia. The ability to see beyond the facades people build, to perceive truths that others ignore. It's a gift that can take you far in life, if used wisely. Dr. Whitman says that the truth should not always be told, Sophia commented, remembering her lessons. He's not wrong, Richard agreed. But there's a difference between discretion and deception, between privacy and lies. It's a fine line that we all navigate daily. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Whitman for Sophia's weekly lesson. As she prepared to leave with her tutor, Richard called her one last time. One last thing, Sophia. Victoria has made accusations, not just against me, but also against you and your mother. The immediate fear on the girl's face made Richard hurry to reassure her. Don't worry. My lawyers will ensure that you are protected. But I want you to understand one thing. In the world Victoria and I live in, truth is often seen as a weapon or a bargaining chip. Some people will do anything to protect their reputation, their lifestyle. Sophia nodded, understanding more than Richard perhaps expected. What I'm trying to say, he continued, is that you and your mother should remain vigilant. Victoria is not someone who accepts defeats easily. 4 months passed. Summer came and went. The beaches of Long Island filled with visitors and emptied again. Julia's surgery was a success, her recovery exemplary. Aunt Carmen returned to Brazil, but not before helping Julia and Sophia settle into their new apartment in Manhattan, a bright and airy space in the Upper West Side, a short walk from Rose Hill Academy. Richard and Victoria's divorce was finalized with surprising speed and discretion, thanks in part to Richard's skillful lawyers and in part to the overwhelming evidence against Victoria. She received the prenuptial agreement, not a penny more, and disappeared to Europe, where, according to rumors, she was already involved with a Swiss industrialist. Sophia adapted well to the new school, although the transition was not without challenges. Rose Hill was a world apart, attended by children of unimaginable privilege. At first, she felt like an intruder, the Brazilian housekeeper's daughter among heiresses of magnates and politicians. But her sharp intelligence and natural insight soon earned her respect, if not immediate friendships. On an autumn afternoon, when the leaves in Central Park were beginning to take on shades of red and gold, Sophia was waiting at the school entrance when a familiar car pulled up to the curb. The back window lowered, revealing Richard Harrison's face. "May I offer you a ride?" he asked. Sophia hesitated for only a moment before entering the luxurious vehicle. Richard was not alone. Gregory occupied the other side of the back seat, absorbed in his phone. "How are classes going?" Richard asked, as the car glided through New York traffic. "Well," Sophia replied, "I have top grades in math and science. Literature is more difficult. If you need help, I can recommend a tutor," Richard offered. "Language was my biggest challenge too when I was young." Sophia couldn't imagine Richard Harrison young, struggling with anything. In her mind, he had always existed as he was now. Powerful, imposing, definitive. "The foundation is officially established," Gregory informed, finally putting away his phone. "The board meets next week to review the first scholarship applications." "Excellent," Richard nodded. "And how is your mother, Sophia? Adapting well to the new position?" "She likes it very much," Sophia confirmed, "especially because she can be home every night to have dinner with me." It was a significant change in their quality of life. As an executive supervisor of Richard's properties, Julia now worked primarily during the day, with weekends free. The relationship between mother and daughter, always strong, had flourished with this additional time together. The car stopped in front of Sophia's building. Before she could get out, Richard handed her an envelope. "An invitation," he explained, "for the launch dinner of the Harrison Foundation for Exceptional Youth. Julia has already confirmed attendance. It would be meaningful if you came too." Sophia accepted the envelope, feeling its thin but significant weight. "Is it because of me?" she asked, referring to the foundation. "Because of what happened?" Gregory and Richard exchanged a look that she couldn't fully interpret. "It's because of what we learned from you," Gregory finally replied. "About honesty, courage, and the complexities of family." When Sophia entered the apartment, she found Julia in the small but elegant kitchen, preparing dinner. A Brazilian song played softly in the background, a piece of home that they kept alive even in this new world. "I saw Mr. Harrison's car," Julia commented, raising an eyebrow. "Something important?" Sophia showed her the invitation. "For the foundation launch." Julia dried her hands on her apron before examining the elegantly printed card. "It seems we'll be the guests of honor," she observed, noticing how their names were highlighted on the list. "It's strange, isn't it?" Sophia reflected, sitting at the kitchen table. "How everything changed because of that night." Julia considered her daughter for a long moment. This extraordinary child who, with an act of impulsive courage, had transformed their lives and shaken a dynasty. "You know what your grandfather always said?" Julia asked, returning to dinner preparation. "That truth is like water. It always finds a way, no matter how many barriers we put in its path." "Do you think I did the right thing?" Sophia asked, the question that had hovered in her mind for months. "Telling the secret?" Julia paused, carefully choosing her words. "I think you did what you believed was right, for reasons that came from the heart. The consequences were complex, some painful, others beneficial. Like most important actions in life," she approached, gently touching her daughter's face. "But more important than any specific outcome is what you learned from all this, about responsibility, about consequences, about how our actions affect others. Dr. Whitman says I'm developing a sophisticated moral compass," Sophia quoted, with the shy pride of a child who has received a compliment she doesn't fully understand. Julia smiled. "He's not wrong." That night, As the city outside pulsed with its endless energy, mother and daughter dined together in their new home, a space that was just theirs, won through an unexpected journey of revealed secrets and acknowledged truths. In another part of the city, Richard Harrison and his non-biological son Gregory were dining too, slowly building a new type of relationship, not based on blood obligations or dynastic expectations, but on conscious choices and shared truths. And somewhere in Europe, Victoria and Eleanor lived with the consequences of lies that had finally come to light, defeated not by expensive investigators or sophisticated technology, but by a 9-year-old girl who could not bear the weight of an unfair secret. The truth, like water, always finds its way. The end